actually taken a look at some of the work at Patchwork Nation, so it's really fantastic stuff. He has also worked with Newsweek. He's worked with the Project for Excellence in Journalism, and he has written for The Economist, Columbia Journalism Review, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. You even worked for. And he can tell you more about his background and what he does. So I'm going to turn it over to Dante. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. That's enough of that. Thanks for having me here. It's warm here. Really warm. I want to talk to you a little bit today. This is kind of adapted. I'm going to zip through this slide thing. We'll go through the slides and talk about them. I did this for like a speech, but it wasn't aimed at journalism. So I want to talk to you a little bit more today as a journalist, and talk about how I came up with the idea behind Patchwork Nation, how it works, and I think, how I hope it's an idea that I had. I hope a lot of other people, and you guys, the next generation, you're going to take this and you'll look back on this and think how stupid it was, and how brilliant your ideas are, which is great. But this is an early step, I think, at least, in trying to get journalism on the right playing field in terms of understanding the way we have to look at the country in a different way. Data is a very big part of it. Before I begin this really quickly too, just so you understand where I come from. I'm not a data person. I've never been a data person. I guess I've become one. I guess I'm kind of an honorary data person, honorary data geek. But I've just been, I started as a print person. My background is in print. I came out of college. I interned at newspapers around the state of Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. I went out and did an internship for a newspaper in Washington, D.C. I went up and I worked for a newsletter in Washington, D.C. I went up and worked for Newsweek, but it was still just a magazine back in the olden days. I was at Newsweek when the World Wide Web just really came into existence. Especially how old I am. And data is something I've come to later in my career, and I came to it in a lot of ways. One of those ways was through the Project for Excellence in Journalism. The Project for Excellence in Journalism is an effort funded by Pew that essentially looks at what's happening in the world of journalism in all sorts of different ways. What's happening to the content, advertising, audience, all those things. And it is inherently number driven because it's, how many readers did they have last year, how many readers did they have this year? What did the ad dollars look like last year? What did the ad dollars look like this year? And I think through that, I became very interested in what you could do with numbers. I was kind of, again, a convert to working with data. And I'm going to explain a little bit how I got there by going through some of these slides. Yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I won't. There we go. I spent a lot of time as a regular journalist writing for the Christian Science Monitor. I was on staff there in 2001. And writing for a whole host of different publications. You guys heard of some of them. And a lot of what I did was I'd go to different places around the country, and I'd write about the place. I'd write profiles of places and try to understand what the heck was going on in the place. And I ate a lot of bad diners, and I drank a lot of bad coffee, and I stayed at a lot of bad hotels. And if you do that enough, if you go to enough places, you start to make connections in your head, right? You start to understand that just as a journalist, not as a data journalist. You're sitting at the crappy diner in Tennessee, and you're like, this is a lot like the crappy diner I was in Minnesota, and that place is a lot like this place. There are a lot of similarities. And you start drawing these things together. And as journalists, we do this. We do a lot of traveling as journalists. You end up doing this just because it's human nature to start to draw those kind of connections between places. And it really helps you to see the different kinds of places in the United States, and you get to understand how complicated it is and how it functions in all these different ways. And then every 4 years we have an election, and all those understanding we have about the United States blows down to this. This is the 2004 map for Kerry versus Bush, and the red states and the blue states. And this is the way we have come to understand America, and we know this is wrong. As journalists, we know this is wrong because we travel to all these different places. You get out at all, and you know that there's a lot of red America that has blue patches, including Texas, and there's a lot of blue America that can be pretty red, including get into upstate New York. It's not at all like New York City. It's world away. And what I wanted to do was get past that. Journalists look at this now. We do this blue and red thing. We're doing it again now. And it's not that blue and red is inherently wrong. I mean, you have to have a way to tell score on election night, so you got to know who won, right? So some states go blue, and some states go red, and that's how we figure out who the president is. But we know this is wrong, so we try to break things down to demographics. And a lot of times we talk about this, we talk about whether or not Mitt Romney is winning women, for instance. Because women, they're only 50% of the population, so they obviously have a lot in common. All the women in here are the same, obviously, because you're women. So we can talk about you that way. And we know that's not really right, because when you break women out into different categories, you have suburban women with, this lady here who lives in this nice house and has a fabulous, family, wonderful children and all that. And then you have this like hipster woman in New York City who goes clubbing at night and has a really great time living there. And then you have this woman who works in the farm. These are all women, right? These are all women that we talk about in election parliament. And these women all have very different ways of seeing the world. They live in very different places, and they understand the world in very different ways. And we try to get around this by assigning all these people names, right? We try to say, like, well, we know that it's not really just women. So we have soccer moms, and we have NASCAR dads, and we have Catholics, or we have lesbians, gays, bisexuals, transsexuals. We have these groups, but all these things miss the point that I found as a journalist traveling around the country, which is place really matters. Where you live, the reality you experience every day where you live really matters. And I saw it when I grew up outside Detroit. Detroit's a very blue place. It's blue. It's only about 40 miles from Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor is also very blue. If you were to look at them in terms of an election map, they look very similar in terms of how blue they are. They're completely different. Detroit is an old, hulking metropolis that's really struggling to get by a large minority population. Ann Arbor is overwhelmingly white. It is wealthy. It is hyper-educated. They're very different. This is true with Red America as well. Fargo, which is pretty red, it's about as red as you're going to get, and the county around it is very red, and so is Orange County. And these places are inherently different. We need to find a way of breaking them into different kinds of place. And that's what Patchwork Nation does. That's what I've been trying to do for the last 4 years. I came up with this idea back in 2008. And this map is, this is the Obama map, by the way, from 2012. Some of these states are going to flip, right? This is the 2008 map. The 2012 map is going to look a little different. Indiana's going to be red, in all likelihood. I don't know what's going to happen in Florida. A lot of the states in Nevada, there's a good chance it's going to go red. But the fundamental nature of the country is going to change. It's a couple votes here or there. It's not all of a sudden that Indiana used to be Democratic and now it's all of a sudden going to be Republican again. It never really changed. There has to be a way of breaking the country down better, and that's why I do what I do. And what we do with Patchwork Nation that uses data is we basically took the country, instead of using states, we got every bit of data we could about every county in America. There's a lot of data out there, a lot of it's from the census. It's everything from age to income to occupation to faith, race, religion. We have religion's a big component of what we do. And we used it to break the 3,100 counties in America into 12 different kinds of place. And I'll go through them on the site as we wrap this thing up, as I wrap up this slide presentation. But what you see when you see the country this way is you see that a lot of things that I notice as a journalist, right? Southern Illinois down here is this red area. This is called service representatives. This red color, but it's a lot like northern Michigan. It really is. There are some similarities. Obviously, maybe it's a little more of a southern field out in southern Illinois. But these places are small town communities that kind of operate with a lot of people that live on the margins. A lot of people don't have health insurance, much lower incomes than most people, than the average median county income in the United States. Those dark blue areas out there in the west are the Mormon outposts. We gave the Mormons their own community type just because we originally didn't do it, actually. We originally had them linked, grouped with evangelicals, but when you look at the country this way, and you think about communities this way, it just didn't work. There were so many fundamental differences between the way these yellow evangelical communities down here, the way they feel, the way they vote about things, and the way these people live, the way they kind of their everyday reality. They're so different. And get when you look at the country this way is just a much more nuanced understanding of how the country really works. And it's all about data. Data underlies everything that we do here. And I have a slide in here just to show that these beige areas are what we call, those are largely suburban counties called the money burbs. And if you look, some of them are very close to these red service worker centers. They're very different places. And they neighbor, some of them neighbor each other. The counties border each other. The money burbs are, of all the types we have in the Patchwork Nation, the wealthiest. They're among the best educated. They're not terribly diverse, but they're more diverse than these service worker centers are. And the way they have experienced everything, from the recession to the housing crisis, everything has been different than what they've experienced in the service worker centers. And this shows in a really kind of fundamental way what's happened to these places over the last 30 years and how the country is actually really coming apart at this county level. It's way more than just rental. It's about the way these people live their lives, how they make their livings, and what's happened in these places. This is the wealthy money burbs here. These yellow areas, this yellow bar here, and the yellow bar for the service worker centers. This is what the median household income was in these county types back in 1980. This is what it was in 2010. This is the median family income. And as you can see, the burbs have actually gained. They're one of the only community types that have gained in capitalization. They've actually seen their median family incomes grow by about $4,000. At the same time, the service worker centers, they've seen their incomes drop by about $3,000. They weren't terribly close to begin with, but they're actually going in different directions. And they're going in different directions because the way people make their living in these service worker centers, the way they do, when you get into all the data, it's just fundamentally different. And I'll take a question.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Sure.
I'm just curious. I assume this is adjusted for inflation. And are these $2010?
These are everything was adjusted to inflation in $2010. Yeah. And this is median family income. And we did, so we did this for all the county types. I'll show you what we did. I should have pulled it up. I'll show you. Get it on the laptop really quickly. We did this for the Atlantic. And it's really interesting because when you look at the country this way, you begin to understand the challenges of governing this country, right? Another example, these pink counties here are what we call tractor country in Patchwork Nation. These are places that rely heavily on agriculture. And it's actually really important to make these differentiations. We think of rural America as one thing, and there definitely is. I would say that when I look at all the data, there's a massive divide between urban and rural America. They're going in really different directions. But it's not all the same. This is rural America, but this is rural America as with an economy that's driven by agriculture. And it's really interesting when you look at, these numbers are old now, this is when I did this, but the gap is about the same. This was as of October last year, what the unemployment rate was nationally in the country and what it was in tractor country. So, in tractor country, in these rural communities, they never had a housing bubble, so the foreclosure crisis, even though it's a very big story nationally, for these people, they don't experience it. It hasn't really impacted their lives anymore. There has not been a foreclosure crisis in tractor country. Unemployment rates are up, but it's not the same. In fact, there are a lot of jobs in agriculture right now. I mean, you're gonna have some technical knowledge, some skills, but there are a lot of jobs out there, more than in journalism. These places right here are called the evangelical epicenters. I showed you them before. The interesting thing about this is you think about the recession and what's happening in the country right now is these places really they don't care. They really don't. They've been pounded by the recession because these places have lower than average median household incomes, lower than average education levels. But you know something? They don't vote on any of that stuff. They really don't. They're going to vote Republican. That's the way they vote, and they vote that way because other issues matter to them more than the economy. And the economy may be the most important issue to you, it may be the most important issue to me. Not always, but sometimes. But to them, it's not. And the idea that you're going to reach those voters or how those voters are going to respond to something, it's really different than how they're going to respond to these wealthy suburban areas in these kind of counties that I call campus and careers, places with a lot of college students, young professionals, very different than the service worker centers. When you see the country this way, you understand how it's really difficult to govern because all of these places want different things, right? You know, the bottom line is these, you know, these places here, these money birds, they really are driven by the economy. And actually, they have not had pain as bad as the rest of the country, but in some ways, they're a little sensitive to it because people there have a lot of money and they don't like when things aren't going well. They particularly don't like when they're not going well in the stock market because they look at things like the 401k and they're very upset about that. So they get, you know, they're very tied with that economy, even though they're not very affected by it. These evangelical centers are very affected by the economy and have been hammered very hard in the recession. They don't really care about it. And then you get up to these places like the service worker centers, those red areas. They've been hit hard in the recession, and they do care about it. But they have other things that motivate them too. And you can get through all that stuff, get to all of it through looking at a lot of the data. Well, when I started doing this project, the initial idea was it was 2008, and there was an election coming up, and everybody knew it was going to be a big deal. And that's when I started doing this. We quickly realized that this wasn't, I mean, it's great for looking at the election. I can show you really some interesting stuff we've seen just in the Republican primaries using this. But when you take all the data we did to create these types, now I can't do this by myself, I'm just a student journalist, but I work with statisticians that help me. I worked with a statistician at the University of Maryland who helped me create this typology. And it's, you know, it's held up remarkably well. I have to say, I went by and told him what I had in mind. Like I said, I'm not a data journalist. I've kind of developed it. But I went to him with this idea I had. Look, I travel all around the country. I see a lot of similarities. There has to be some way of quantifying this. And, you know, we took all these data points and we created this typology. And it's great for looking at everything. It really is. It's terrific for looking at unemployment rates. The unemployment rates in these places are really different. Gas prices, which is something I did really recently again. Something I did for the site. I partnered with the NewsHour and I do some stuff with the Wall Street Journal. But the interesting thing with, say, gas prices is, so this is look at what's happening in gas prices between January and March. And you know, when you look at the hike is I mean, it's a little higher in some places, but it's up everywhere. And the tendency would be to think like, well, gas prices are a big deal everywhere. I mean, because it's up everywhere. And I think that may be true, but some places, when you start looking at the data, these people in these service worker centers, they have to drive to do everything, right? They have to drive because nothing's really very close. So everything is a 10 or 15 mile drive to town for a lot of these people, right? Tractor country. There's something I wrote about in this piece, tractor country. Think of everything that's involved in an agricultural economy, right? That runs on fuel, where they have to have cheap gas, or it's better for them to have cheap gas. Meanwhile, if you live in these big city places that we call the industrial metropolis, which I live in DC, I don't really notice an increase in gas prices that much because I don't drive. I really don't. I mean, we have a car, but we don't use, I mean, we have a car, I take the kids to school in the morning, but I take the train to work. I take the metro to work, and so does my wife. And, you know, it makes you understand these, it gives you a whole different way of looking at, using data to create these types gives you a whole different way to look at data. And once you have that way of looking at data, you have a whole different way of looking at all sorts of issues. I think that Patchwork Nation was originally created as a way of looking at the 2008 election and what was going to happen. It is a remarkable tool because of what's happening in the country right now for understanding what's happening politically, economically, culturally. Because what's going to happen in the next 10 years, we're just at the beginning of it, right? Things are going to get really interesting over the next decade. Like, if you think that this wave of populism you're seeing now is interesting, this is just the beginning. Because what's happened economically in this country, and this is what when we looked at these incomes over 30 years, the country's kind of been pulling apart for a while, right? The way the economy works now, there are more, the line between winners and losers, and places that are going to do okay in the new economy, and places that aren't going to do so well in the new economy, is going to play a big role in how these places evolve, and how they change, and how the country ultimately evolves. And it's data is a huge part of this, but it's not the end. It's the beginning in a way of trying to understand what's going on in the country. we've been able to take all the Republican primaries so far, and we're able to do them state by state on these maps, and we can look at the results county by county, which is fun. Everybody kind of likes to do that. But the interesting thing is you get down and look at these types, and you really begin to notice divides in the populace. Right? So here you have, this is Wisconsin. Around the, along Wisconsin, that was essentially the death knell of the Santorum campaign. And, where did he do? What did he do? Well, he's really doing well in these wealthy suburban areas. And he did pretty well in Wisconsin already. He won it by 5 points. He did even better in Illinois. I can show you that in a second. But even though he won Wisconsin. He did very well here in these wealthy suburban areas. He did very well in these places called the industrial metropolis. It's Milwaukee in Wisconsin. But then you get out here to these service worker centers. Even in states he lost, Santorum won these places. He won it here. He won these aging, emptying nests here. And I'll show you the same thing when you get down to Illinois. Illinois was, Romney won Illinois pretty big. He won Illinois by 8 percentage points here. And he, again, kicked butt here. He just, he hammered him in Chicago. But you get out here, this is Santorum country. This is Santorum country. These evangelical communities, they're always Santorum country. So what's going on? This filter we've created for data has allowed us to see something that's happening in the Republican Party right now. Right? I got the right of. I will say I don't know. I'm not the only person to point this out. We were there first. We were the first ones to know that this was really going on. The initial talk with Santorum was what he was doing was he was winning all these cultural conservatives, which he did. He's done very well with cultural conservatives. But what you really start to look at when you look at the vote, the way we did, was you started to see this real class divide, and it's just become this vote. It's working. It's coming eventually. It'll come here. There's a big class divide in the GOP right now, and it's gonna be a real challenge for Romney coming up in this campaign, because like some of Romney's problems are, he's the evangelical communities. He's a Mormon. I'll tell you, I don't care what anybody says about the fact that he's a Mormon and it shouldn't matter. You go to these evangelical communities, it really matters he's a Mormon, and they won't say it directly. They won't say it directly, but they'll say, well, he's a Mormon, and that doesn't really bother me, but I have friends who that would really offend. And that's a way of getting at the fact that they're just not comfortable with him being a Mormon. Here's looking at the data. So what we did with these is we looked at counties that were above and below the statewide median income average, or statewide median in income. All these places here that were, all these places that are higher than the median, Romney does well. If it's lower than the statewide median, Santorum did well. This is a class divide. This is a class divide that's about economics. And it's going on inside of the GOP, which makes you think, what's that going to be in the fall, right? When we actually have a Democratic candidate. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it's going to be. It's hard to, you can't take stuff from the primary season and say for certain what it's going to mean. But it says to me that there's something big that we've been able to see with this project using data. There's a big shift underway in the United States right now. And this campaign is really, I think 2008 was the first campaign where the economic collapse really caught a lot of people. I was on the road when it was happening. And I was actually in a wealthy community when McCain, I don't know how many people paid close attention in 2008, but when McCain suspended the campaign because he felt they had to go back to Washington and fix the economy. I was in a wealthy community where people were very well educated, very wealthy, and when he did that, they just basically threw up their hands and they decided they weren't going to vote for McCain. It was clear. He lost, McCain lost the money burbs by 12 percentage points to Barack Obama. Democrats, the money burbs have been trending Democratic for the past several elections. So Gore won them by about 3 percentage points, and Kerry won them by only 1 percentage point. It was closer. But then Obama won by 12 percentage points. You can argue that's where he won the entire election. Those places, when they saw what McCain did, that was kind of the last straw. They were probably going to go with Obama anyway because they weren't pleased with the direction that Bush had taken the economy, that Bush had taken the country, and they were going to flip back. They flipped back hard. But that was kind of the last straw. But 2008 was just the beginning of it. In 2012, I think what we're going to see is those money verbs will be closer again. I think Obama will win them by a bit more than Kerry did, or maybe even Gore did. But that's going to decide the election. Who does well in those places? The thing that's going to be very interesting to watch, as far as I'm concerned, are these places. These service worker centers. These places they really kind of, they don't do very well. They've not done very well in the recession, and they've been hit really hard. And when the populist uprising you see right now, the Tea Party and that stuff, the Tea Party was really a populist uprising. It wasn't. It was a populist uprising where people were talking about, oh, we're angry at the government, but we still don't think you should raise taxes on people that make over $250,000 a year. That's not a populist movement by definition. Right? Populist by definition, and that's not a liberal point of view. Populists hate all people in power. That's the point of being a populist. You hate people with power and control, includes people who have a lot of money. That wasn't a true populist movement. I think you could argue the Occupy thing, it's the same thing. The Occupy movement is the democratic, kind of flip of that. It's kind of the democratic view that they don't like what business has done. Interestingly, those Occupy movements were primarily based in the industrial metropolises. They were all in big cities. I know that they were scattered all around the country, but the biggest movement was in these big cities. The Tea Party movement was based all around the country, but you had the strongest affiliations in these communities, these boom towns. These boom towns are places that experienced rapid growth in the first half of the last decade, and then, basically watched the housing market collapse. And when it collapsed, it really hit these places hard. A lot of people in these communities are underwater, and they're struggling. A prototypical boom town is Clark County, where Las Vegas is. They're really, really strong. I mean, I can't believe they're building there again, but they are. But everybody's underwater. It's just a sea of foreclosures, and that kind of prompted the Tea Party thing. But when you really are going to see something is when you see the populist movement hit these places. Because these places really have a right to be angry about a lot of things. These places, and I would argue, I guess you can add into it, let's do it this way. These places and these places, maybe too. Okay. These places are really being left behind. Okay. But the way the economy is moving, these places are being left behind. And at some point, they're going to be very angry, and they're going to start voting for things that people aren't going to like. They're going to start doing things that are going to make people very nervous, people in power, just because that's what populist movements really do. Populist movements are about one party or another. They're about people that are upset with the status quo, and particularly upset with people in power. When it hits these places, and I think it's still gonna take some time. It's gonna be 2016 or after. That's when politics in America is gonna get really interesting. Maybe a little scary, but not. Don't worry, we'll all come up. Okay, sure. The point is, these kind of broad observational looks at what's happening, they're not just based on, as a lot of, look, I live in Washington. There are a lot of people who make money as analysts, and God bless them. They go on TV and just say what they think. I'm not telling you what I think, right? I'm not. I'm telling you what I'm telling you based on the numbers that I see. The numbers that I see for all these places. And I visit these places. I have one community for each one of these 12 types. And I go and I visit them, and I talk to people, and I kind of take the temperature of the community, and I get a sense of what's going on. Data ultimately, when you use it the right way, you shape it the right way, yields a whole bunch of stuff. It's the beginning of a way of looking at the country in different ways, and it's the beginning of a way to tell stories in ways we haven't in the past. And we need that. We need new ways of telling stories. Because the country is evolving and it's changing, and actually it's disintegrating somewhat. And then we like to think that what's happening in America is that the web is making it so that community doesn't matter anymore because you can live in rural Nebraska and the morning paper can be the New York Times. And that's true. If you have a web connection, the New York Times can be your morning paper wherever you live. That's just, most people don't do that, right? What's really happening is these communities that are experiencing different kinds of things are going off in different directions. And they're going to start pulling the country apart in these different ways, and you need ways to dig in and look at them. And if you can't just go to Peoria, or you can't just get in the car, which we do too much, and just say, I'm going to go to this town, or I'm going to go to where the factory closed. What this gives you, what data gives you, is a way to say, I'm going to go to the place where the factory closed, and I'm going to tell you why it's like a lot of other places where factories are closed, and why this is something that's bigger than just this place. It's about all these kinds of places in the country. That's what data can do for you. Data isn't just about graphics and nice maps, which, we have some decent maps. It's about having those data there to back up ideas, to help you understand something better, and then tell the story better. That's what I think. I mean, that's why I do what I do. And I think we're just really still at the beginning of what we can do with this. I was talking to Chinni today about some plans we have. There's so much you can do with data. There's so much you can do with it if you're smart, and you don't just do the graph or the fever line chart that just like you need because you need art for your story, right? You dig into the data, and it'll give you more stories than you ever could possibly imagine. And let me take some questions from you and see what you have to say. Yeah.
One of my favorite websites is 5